Yeah, absolutely. Welcome everyone to our virtual tasting for WhiskySponge with Angus, our regular whiskey geek, and the brains behind all of this, and a new distillery as well, which might get a little bit mentioned. But yeah, obviously, if you've got enough glasses to have some in every glass, please don't drive afterwards, and tasting notes, questions, because there's a small intimate group, a little bit of questions are always excellent, and you can be as personal as you like. But without too much fanfare, I'm going to hand it over to Angus to get us started on spilling the secrets of the secret Speyside.
Thanks, Emma. It's Glen Grant. There you go. If you can't tell that from the label, then you're still at level 1 whiskey geekery. You need to pull your socks up in advance. So yeah, this is it's a Glen Grant, and the reason it was unnamed, because Glen Grant usually isn't unnamed, but it's because the story goes that theoretically it was lightly peated malt that this batch was produced from. Now, whether this is one of these instances where a Speyside distillery gets the wrong delivery of barley and just decides to produce with it anyway, and they get the wrong spec, I'm not sure. But essentially, this large parcel of casks was sold to the people that we purchased it from, because the distillery viewed it as non-typical of Glen Grant make and non-suitable for the Glen Grant blends either. So now, how much of that you believe from nosing and tasting it, I don't know. I think I do detect a very faint thread of something perhaps slightly medicinal or a very distant, trace of smoke. But I don't consider it to be particularly peaty whiskey. I find some pretty classical and slightly older school, heavier Glen Grant qualities about it, in that you've got this very nice, quite direct orchard fruitiness, quite a nice natural sweetness from the barley, which doesn't feel too wood derived. It's just a typical refill hogshead, so it's quite light touch from the oak, but it's at a nice age, 19 years old, good natural cask strength, 51.2. So you're getting a very lovely, rounded, quite full mouth coating and naturally sweet Glen Grant profile. I love Glen Grant. It's one of my favorite distilleries, my favorite Speysider for sure. And I love the way that the distillate can be so adaptable, and it can show beautifully as a very pale, very basic 5-year-old, all the way up to 60, 70-year-old examples from sherry casks. Admittedly, that was the sort of older style Glen Grant. Although it's worth remembering, I think, that Glen Grant retained quite a lot of its inherent weight and fatness, because even into the 90s, they were still doing direct gas firing, and that tends to create a slightly heavier spirit profile. It's not from ex Lafroig or ex Ardbeg or ex peated make cask. So the cask, the refill hogshead, as far as I'm aware, didn't contain peated malt from a different distillery before. It would be, the story goes, as we were told by the people we bought this from, was that the barley used to distill this parcel of casks was lightly to medium peated. But make of that what you will. I don't detect a huge amount of peat in it, perhaps a few trace amounts, but I do really like this whiskey, and I was very happy to bottle it. And Glen Grant's good because it says Secret Speyside on the label, but as you can see, there's quite a few options for surreptitiously communicating the distillery. So yeah, I was very happy with this bottling, and we did pretty well with this one. And yeah, I haven't tried it for a while, so I don't actually have a sample bottle open anymore. My colleague Julie has our sample bottle, so I need to get it back off her and have a dram again, because I remember it being pretty delicious. Does everyone like it? How's it going down? It's a good first dram for the evening, I would say.
Yeah, it's just like a real softness, and I do get like a little bit of peated, but in a savory note. Like, I don't know, when they do those like pork roll up, pork cheddar slicey thingies, and there's a whole bunch of herbs in the middle, and like the pork fattiness on the outside, getting a little bit of that Scott reckons it's got a nice creamy mouthfeel. I totally agree. Justin's
Yes,
getting
I agree with that. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think there is something going on in there that's slightly unusual or might have something to do with phenolics of some sort, but it's quite ethereal and everyone seems to have a different take on it. But you know, so and I put that, you know, lightly peated in the label just because it's fun and it's different. But it's one of those ones. It's a good conversation piece whiskey to sort of see, you know, oh, I detect this or I don't get that or whatever. But at the end of the day, I don't mind because it's a quality dram. It's very delicious, and I think actually it speaks to a nice sort of quite classical, maybe more like late 70s style profile of Glen Grant. So yeah, I was really happy with it. And yeah, I don't know. It's not much else to say about it except it's delicious.
So, like, obviously, whether it was like a mistake or not, because I know that an Aussie distiller I chat to had the wrong barrel scent and they'd already filled it up, and it was like, oh well, this is how it's going. Is that like peated when you're not supposed to get peated barley? Would that be a kind of accident that has happened?
Yeah,
more than
happens a lot more than you would imagine. Like the getting the wrong delivery of, like every Speyside distillery seems to have this of, oh, we got the wrong malt delivery, fuck it, let's just produce with it and then deal with the consequences later on. So that happened perhaps more famously at Macallan in the 80s. I want to say 88 or 86. There's some SMWS bottlings of Macallan which are heavily peated and quite odd and strange. And the story goes that was the wrong delivery of quite heavily peated malt, and they just ran with it and made this heavily peated Macallan. And I think it's, you know, it makes sense because Macallan used to obviously be quite a lot more peated in the late 40s and 1930s and earlier, but the sort of squat fat stills and the quite naturally weighty distillate profile that Macallan produces lends itself, I think, quite well to peat. So when they did this, I think what they used that stock for was the basis for this series of bottlings called the Travel Retail series, or no, just the Travel series. So it was like 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, and blending in different proportions of this peated malt to, in their words, sort of mimic older style, more heavily peated examples of Macallan from previous decades. I'm pretty sure that whole series was just concocted as an excuse to use up this peated batch, and it came out about the time that that SMWS bottling also came out, so it would make sense. So that's probably one of the most famous examples, but I think there's lots of other examples. And when you've got distillers in Speyside anyway, like Benria, who are regularly using peated batches of malt, or like Glenkeith will have done stuff, Strathisla, this is all a recipe for the incorrect lorry loads of peated malt being delivered to the wrong distillery or dispatched incorrectly by the maltster, you know. So these things do happen, and it's useful from an independent bottler's perspective because it creates interesting diversity and also motivates these bigger companies to dump large parcels of interesting casks onto the brokers market, which helps to feed the indies. So I'm all for mistakes and accidental experiments.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So should we have a chat about the Fettercairn? It's going to be quite a gear shift from the Glen Grant.
Yes, I can imagine, but it excites me. It's one of my favorite distilleries, and I got the opportunity to meet Greg, their master blender, at the gala. He gave me his lucky Fettercairn pin, so now I'm like terrified to lose it.
Is that the magic Fettercairn pin that controls the level of cheese flavor in Fettercairn?
God, I hope not, because it being in Australia might be problematic.
This is my feeling with Fettercairn, is that it's charming and never boring, but it has a deeply inconsistent aspect to its character. Like sometimes it can have this quite wonderful, big, fat, rich Highland style profile, and other times it can taste of like cheese toasties in a way which is just quite disconcerting and a bit bit weird. But you know, as I go back to this thing I always say, which is it's never boring, which is something many other distilleries are frequently guilty of. So I'm always happy to try a Fettercairn, and I'd been wanting to bottle a Fettercairn for a long time, but finding casks that weren't just too weird or soapy or too cheesy was quite challenging. So this was a parcel that Signatory had in their warehouse, just a row of 95 hogsheads, and I thought they were all very, very good. And it was one of these things where the strength is still up really high. You know, this is natural cask strength 61.3. And now whether that's happened because they were filled very strong, or whether they've just matured in a climate and an environment that has maintained quite a sort of high cruising altitude of alcohol level, I don't know. But the character to me is, it reminded me of like old rare malts bottlings by Diageo from the 90s, where it was very refill profile, very, very pure, very distillate driven, and very, very punchy and strong. Because a lot of those casks were filled in the 70s at much higher filling strengths to protect things like water supply and cask shortages, warehouse space, all these sorts of reasons. And people are still doing that today, like Glenrothes do that all the time. So it created this quite sort of distinctive profile amongst this rare malt series, and that was a style that really reminded me, or this Fettercairn really reminded me of. And I really like that profile anyway in whiskey, where you've got a very big, quite full-bodied, assertive distillate, a really gutsy natural strength, but also a good age. So you've got the complexity of maturity and age, but you've still got real power. And you know, from pretty light touch refill wood that gives the distillate nowhere to hide. So you're really looking at the kind of the bare bones, the DNA, the sort of raw under the skin architecture of Fettercairn, which is the stuff of phantasmagoric nightmares when you put it like that. But actually, in this sense, I think it's quite tasty and really interesting. And there is a bit of funk about this whiskey, but I don't think it's too excessive. I think you've got this quite traditional Highland, like mineral, waxy, fat profile, oiliness, weight of distillate in the mouth. But on top of that, you've got a little bit of mechanical, funky toolbox, greasy weirdness. You've got just a very thready touch of this like cheesecloth vibe, which is pure Fettercairn, and also going into territory that reminds me of stuff like oily sheep wool and things like paint and like mashed vegetables, bouillon stock, stuff like that. So it has its funky sides, but I think they're maintained within balance. How does it go with water? I think it works fine with water, and you've obviously got quite a lot of room. And I in my head, this was always one of those whiskies where it would be very fun to pour blind with a bunch of whiskey chums, and it's one where if you have your pipette to hand, you could really go to town and do multiple dilutions and stages, and it would probably reveal, you know, a number of different facets to its profile. So yeah, I'm curious what people think of this one, because I suspect this is another in a long line of Decadent Drinks bottlings, which would be charitably classed as divisive. But I don't know. I like it a lot. It's my style, but it's not controversial. It's not as easy as the Glen Grant, but I don't know. I thought this was pretty good stuff, this Fettercairn.
Yeah, well, like I've always been a sucker for Fettercairn. I always find that it has this note of like raspberries dipped in balsamic glaze. It's got that fruit, that funk, that acid, and all that wrapped in one. And I definitely get like a little bit of that, but I'm definitely getting that like that paint at the end as well, that lanolin, almost like bubble tea, tapioca at the end as well. But I have added.
I know what you mean. I definitely agree with the acidity aspect and that slightly sort of tangy, funky balsamic thing. I think that's definitely, and then in the worst examples, that character can stray over into like more sort of butyric aspects. But when it's in check and balance, I think it's pretty elegant. Yeah, it is one of those distilleries that, you know, if the faders are all aligned, it can be fantastic, but it's very easy for things just to get like knocked out of whack and go absolutely weird and mental.
Yeah.
Um,
Keenan says he loves the profile. It's one of the best he's tried from the distillery.
I
Scott
think actually it says best, not one of, but the best. I think
best.
it's very important to
To clarify,
point that out.
is
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
best. Move over everyone else.
That's a quote for your promotional materials, I think. Fettercairn Virgin, that is probably the title of a 1980s horror film.
Bit of water giving me some apple crumble from Michael. Yeah, fully matured in the same cask.
Yep. Yeah, it's full term refill hogshead. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And I have to ask as well, because I never have the bottles with me. I always have samplers like you guys. But the Fifth Doctor, is it?
Nah, four. It'll always be fourth. It'll always be Tom Baker.
Yeah. Well, no, because this is Peter. What's his face?
Peter Davison is the Fifth Doctor, but it's got the scarf. In fact, where's my bottle? I'm going to. Nah, come on. It's got the scarf. If it was Peter Davison, it would have the cricket outfit.
That's right.
It's always the Fourth Doctor because Tom Baker is supreme.
So was there a reason behind putting?
I just like excuses to do Doctor Who references, and to be honest with you, I just like excuses to do science fiction references. I mean, you've got 2 editions after this. It's Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home.
We've got a Mad Max later as well.
Yeah, that's Mad Max. I mean, in fact, I think I'm just really wallowing in science fiction at the moment. I should probably try and do something different. Yeah, it's a fine balance. It's trying to do pop cultural sci-fi references without also getting sued. So yeah, it's a balancing act.
Don't do Star Wars.
Yeah, don't even touch that.
Well, we did Star Wars once and we got away with it, but I'm not poking that wasp nest again. Also, Star Wars is not as good as the other properties, so it's fine. He says, starting a massive row.
Half the room quits and protests.
Yeah, next thing you know, it'll be a Star Wars versus Trekkies versus, we don't need that in our lives.
It would be a nice idea for like a trilogy set of like just the 3 properties all at war or something. I don't know. I'm just getting random ideas here. Not going to commit to anything. Fettercairn is great. That's good. I'm glad people are enjoying it. It's definitely a dram that you could spend quite a lot of time dissecting, I think. I mean, it's a big, chunky, detailed whiskey with quite a lot going on in there. And I certainly think that high ABV allows you to really play around with adding different levels of water and getting different shades of its character revealed. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's such a unique thing for its age to have such a high ABV. Like, I've seen whiskeys that old that are like natural strength of 45. So it's truly magic.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ardmore, from one funky distillery to another.
Yep.
I got into trouble with my colleague Julie about this bottling. She hates the label because it's just a massive load of poo jokes. And she says, it's all well and good you doing that and then not having to go out and speak to people, but I've got to go and pour this for people in pubs and restaurants. And I said, well, fair point. I don't know. Like, anyway, yeah. So she frequently tells me off about this one. But I don't know. I was just riffing on the fact that Ardmore traditionally is quite a farmyard profile. So I really love Ardmore. I think it's a underrated distillate, and certainly Ardmore from these vintages, like the late 90s and then the 2000 that we'll have next, where the whiskey was still being made with direct coal firing. It was one of the last distilleries in Scotland to stop direct coal firing. I think it stopped in 2002, I want to say. So both of these ones we're going to have will have been made with directly coal-fired stills, and it always made this really nice combination of heavy fat distillate with a light amount of peat. It was never heavily peated malt, but it had enough peat in it, probably just under Talisker level peat, or maybe just above Springbank level peat, that kind of pitch, you know, around like sort of 10 to 15 ppm. And the character of the whiskey as a result was always really, I think, very interesting. Like this sort of soft, gently quilty, medicinal, phenolic, dry peat with like quite a Highland style peat, but with also this Highland waxy style distillate, and that we could be quite peppery or spicy and often quite dry. And it just made a quite, I would say, quite a challenging make, but also a really charismatic one that retained this kind of Highland charismatic style for many years beyond a lot of its contemporaries. So this is a good example, I think. So 1997, full term matured in refill hogshead and natural cask strength 52.4. And I think this is one where it's starting to show really nice maturity. You're starting to reveal some like nice white fruits in there, some green fruits, and you've still got plenty of this very soft, elegant, peppery peat smoke and waxes. And it's just it's again in the same school of the Fettercairn and the Glen Grant, in that it's good examples of very typical distillery character at good ages, from light touch refill wood that just reveals the full distillery DNA. So that's the you know, and that's the kind of the Decadent Drinks, you know, house style, I suppose, of us as a bottler, is that I really like to just find good casks that reveal a nice charismatic take on a specific distillate.
I was just going to add because when both of these arrived, they're very similar whiskies, but the color is so different.
Yep.
Like just one's very pitch black, the other one's classic bourbon, you know, style, and it's so cool that you actually get to do a bit of a side by side.
Yeah, there's a very different take on the same distillate. I mean, they will be pretty similar distillates because, you know, obviously these are both from that pre upgrade era when they, you know, changed the still room over and changed over to steam and all these things. So it's it'll be pretty similar distillate, but treated in a different way. And we can talk a bit about the 2000 as well alongside it, and it might be interesting if you've got a couple of glasses to do a sort of side by side, because really the 2000 is just the same distillate but slightly younger, and it's spent just over 2 years in first fill sherry butts. So you're getting that same distillate with a really quite rich double maturation in sherry that's given it a big thick cloak of quite active sherry. But it's a spirit that I think takes sherry very well. Some of the really old Ardmore bottlings, they're very rare now, unfortunately, and they're quite expensive. But you find some really old ones where you had quite a lot of sherry influence in them. And it's a distillate that works very well with sherry because that inherent weight and oiliness and fatness and that soft peat, I think, integrates and marries very well with a good sort of rich, robust sherry like Oloroso or something. So I think that balance and that combination, the fusion of the two in the 2000 bottling, the edition 69, is really quite luxurious and very lovely. I think you get this soft peat integrating well with the sherry and creating all these flavors like, you know, cocoa and bitter dark chocolate and layers of tobacco and like that kind of pickled walnut, salted almond vibe you get in some nice old sherry casks. So I think it works really well. And the 97 by comparison just being a bit fresher and fruitier and more bare bones and just, you know, that kind of pure distillate profile and a more isolated take on Ardmore's peat. So I really like both of them, and I think they're kind of two flip sides of the Ardmore coin.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Ardmore, and I think Justin Farmer said he got a huge slab of salted butter from the whiskey, and I completely agree. I've always gotten salted butter. Scott says Vegemite on toast for the finish. It was giving me, when you were talking about that farmyard, and it might be that I define Ardmore as before they stopped coal fire stills. But yeah, it was really like smelling, because I was at the Isle of Woolen mill recently, and it was just like dusty wool fibers everywhere, and it really is a just pungent, dry, old lanolin thing, and I got that on the whiskey so much.
Yeah, lanolin, wool, mothballs, hessian, camphor, all these things are like Ardmore 101.
Yeah, 100%. But I also got tempura batter, but I was like, am I tasting that right? But yeah, no, and yeah, the difference between if you haven't moved on to the sherry cask Ardmore, definitely side by side them.
Yeah, the sherry cask is yeah, I'm not going to have any. It's before midday. I do have a bottle open. I'm looking at it. But, yeah, I was really pleased with it. I think we don't do finishes very often, really, because I just think 99 times out of 100 finishes just don't work. They're done for too short a period of time to allow proper integration between the new cask and the spirit to happen. But 2 years is like a good yardstick in my head. That's where I think you start to stray more into double maturation territory. Like for instance, the Glenmurray we're just about to launch, the 1992, which is the follow-up to the Glengarry 91 we did last year. That's had the same maturation profile, which is 10 years in a refill hogshead, then re-racked into fresh port hogshead for 20 more years, so until it was 30 years old. And that type of maturation profile is really unusual, and that's a true double maturation. And that's the sort of thing where I think it becomes really interesting and often really, good quality. But this Ardmore has a similar thing, and that's why I decided to bottle it. I thought it's so scarce to get a really good dark sherried Ardmore, and I think it's a really good whiskey. So yeah, that's why we went for it. But it's really nice stuff. It's lovely.
Yeah, especially at this age statement as well, because typically sherry cask Ardmore just gets snapped up quite young by everyone.
Well, I think a lot of the ones out there are probably just ones where there's been a bit of flash finishing, because there's large parcels of, and that's the other thing to bear in mind, is that there's a big parcel of Ardmore from sort of 2009, 2010, 2011, up to like 2015. There's big parcels of usually second fill barrels of Ardmore, which came from Laphroaig. So there's an even more intense, like the peat from the Laphroaig kind of deletes the Ardmore DNA to some extent. Not always. There's some really good examples out there. Like we've got a small parcel of casks of 09 Ardmores, and they're shaping up really beautifully. But the thing I like about these two bottlings is because the peat is just all Ardmore. There's no obfuscation from some Laphroaig peat getting in the way. So you're getting just a really true example of the Ardmore character. And the stuff that a lot of other bottlers are putting out now, where they do finishes or add some sherry to it, it goes back to this thing I was saying about it being for quite a short amount of time. So I think it doesn't always work. It struggles to achieve balance and true integration. There are some people who do a very good job of that. I think people like James Eady do a very good job of clever finishing and wood management, and in quite a sort of modern technological way. And that's good, that's their style, but it's not a style I would want to compete against or play with myself, because I don't think I'd be able to do a very good job of it. You really need your own warehouse to do stuff like that. So, and when we get our own warehouse, I've got a lot of other things I would rather be doing, which is doing re-racking, but playing around with things like marrying and using careful use of refill wood, and lots of fun, crazy stuff, which will probably cost loads of money and go wrong, but we'll find out. We'll do it anyway.
Angus, remind me if I'm correct. I remember Serge saying this whiskey did a hell of a job. The sherry did a hell of a job, and hate to hear me say that when he tried this.
Yeah, that sounds like the sort of thing. He usually complains whenever he likes a whiskey that's been finished. But I don't know. I mean, he's also on record many times as saying on Whiskey Fun that 2 years is a, you know, is a proper length of time. And like, I think he always says that when he's trying things like the Diageo Distillers Editions. I mean, they are all 2-year minimum for their finishing period. So yeah, I mean, I'm of the same opinion that 2 years is a good length of time. In fact, I don't think we've done. No, we did do a shorter term finish. We did the Bimber we did was 6 months or 8 months in ex Imperial Stout barrel. But to be honest with you, beer casks are just essentially first fill barrels that have got a bit of beer in them. So it's sort of not really a proper finish. Don't tell people at Bimber I said that. But yeah.
We'll tell absolutely no one. It'll never get out on the internet. But yeah, no,
Yeah, it's all right.
super cool.
I'm not too worried.
I do have to ask again on the labels, who are the crabs, the lobster?
They're my friends, Ewan and Ashley. Ewan Campbell is the head of whiskey and cask management at the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. And we have a running joke about Ardmore being farmy and made by crabs. I can't tell you where that came from. Probably any one of any number of like mad drunken sessions that came out of. But that's Ewan and his partner Ashley, who we have this frequent banter about Ardmore with. So I just shoved them on the label in a kind of celebratory fashion. And to the untrained eye, it's just a weird sort of crab themed Aberdonian riff on Ardmore and Mad Max. I should really save the Mad Max references for if we ever get to do an Australian whiskey, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Always revisit that.
I mean,
you can be Futurosa or whatever, Furiosa, that was it. Emma, we'll get you with the.
So many Australian things you could do. You could do like, there's just so many weird and random iconic things in Australian history. You don't even need to go Mad Max. There's so much more weirder stuff.
One day our Prime Minister went for a swim in the ocean.
We just lost him.
He never came out. And then we named the pool after him in a different state.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that happens regularly, that people just get eaten by the nature in Australia, like swallowed up by the ocean, murdered by the insects, disappeared by the bush. I don't know. It's a bit frightening, Australia. I think we all in this country have this idea that it's deadly. But
yeah, I think I was talking to someone about it and they're like, I'd love to come to Australia, but I'm just terrified of spiders. I'm like, well, the big scary ones aren't actually venomous. They're just like really big. And I was like holding up some of the size of huntsmans that I've seen. And they were like, nope, not even a little bit. It's like, I had one of the car ones. I named him Barry. It's fine.
When my parents lived in Australia, my dad had to try and get a very large spider out of the bath, and he used a broom to try and shoo it away, and the spider jumped up the broom and ran up the shaft. And so yeah, that broom was quickly ejected, I think. But it was, yeah, there's plenty of stories. Like my uncle got bitten on the arse by a black, no, not a black widow, he'd be redback. It was a redback, that was it. Redback, I don't know. Yeah, there's spiders and all these things. I don't know, if we did a Australian whiskey, I would probably try and do something. We could involve spiders. We could really go to town and do like a arachnophobe special or something like that.
You could bring in that what's that Harry Potter like spider forest thing? I don't know. Something.
Well, we could do Shelob from Lord of the Rings, but just give her like one of those weird Australian hats with a load of corks or something like that.
The Tolkien estate is only across the dip and would cease and desist that pretty quickly.
Nah, we'll find ways to get around them. There'll be where there's a will, there's a way. I do like the idea of doing more Mad Max stuff. Because I write notes for the SNWS. I'm on the panel and I do the.
You're responsible for the Mad Max references.
Yeah. So there's Mad Wax 2, Mad Wax Beyond Thunder Dram, and then Mad Wax Fruity Load. There's 4 of them now. So
Pretty sure they were all Klein Leach, right?
no, I think they're different distilleries, but anything that was particularly waxy for a while, I went through this phase of until I ran out of films. So they'll have to wait until they make a new film, and then we can do another name. But they're all me, and that was a component of what inspired the Ardmore Mad Max themes on the label. So yeah, just more of my entertaining myself with stupid sci-fi references in pretty much every aspect of my whiskey work. When we start to release Kythe bottlings, maybe I'll find a way to imbue those labels with nonsense as well. I probably won't because Johnny wouldn't allow it, but we'll see.
You could do like, you know, those playing cards you get, and there's like a message or an image hidden in the corner of the playing card. You could do something like that.
I'll bear it all in mind. That's some distance in the future now. Bowmore, yes. Let's have some peat.
You are controversially, that there's a lot of people who love Bowmore in Australia who do not like it being referenced to soap, and then you just went to the nth degree, which was, I loved it.
Yeah, well, it was really just trying to suggest that the sponge was battling off and protecting everyone from the influence of soap, in that I had selected a cask that was definitely not soapy or Parma Violet-y. So that was really the reference, plus all the sort of coastal, vigorous, powerful sort of imagery from that old painting the Rembrandt painting that we lovingly ripped off. I was very happy with that label. I thought it was really quite cool. And I really like this whiskey. This is Bowmore from 2003, and it had a broken maturation cycle. So someone had bought it. It was a signatory cask, and someone bought it. I bought 2 of them, and we bottled both of these casks. We did a 17-year-old version for edition 50 of Sponge, and this is the sibling cask that's had 1 extra year. And so someone bought this when the stock was about 14 years old, and it had been maturing in refill sherry butts anyway. And so it was taken out of refill sherry butts, put into an IBC, and then a holding vessel, and then the sale, for whatever reason, got cancelled, fell through. So they put the whiskey back into 2 different but similar refill sherry butts, and just left it to continue maturing. And that's when I stumbled across these casks in the warehouse and thought, I'll have to have these. So I really like them. They're both quite different. The first one we had, to my head, was more sherried, had a bit more sherry character, and it was maybe a little more coastal, sharper, whereas this one I think is peatier and fruitier, and the sherry takes a slightly more, it's still there, it's still present, but it's dialed down in the mix a wee bit, and you do get a really nice exoticism off the Bowmore distillate. I mean, Bowmore from this era, 2003, 2001, that sort of period, is just super fruity, and it's really pristine, stunning distillate. Probably one of the best distillates in Scotland, I think, this day and age. And when it is just in a good, first fill barrel, refill hoggy, refill sherry butt like this, simple classical cask, full term, no messing about, it just shows in such great fashion. It's a perfect age for it as well. 17, 18 years. It's still fresh, but it's nicely mature and rounded, and it's just this fusion of soft, fragrant peat smoke, exotic fruits like dried fruits, soft, salty sherry, loads of coastal freshness. I love it. I think it's gorgeous. And this one we did at cask strength. The previous one we reduced by a couple of degrees to 53%. But this one, I just thought, it's the last one, let's just do it at cask strength.
Yeah, it's got that classic like sweet and grilled pineapple thing to it, just like fresh off the grill. It's so those classical tropical notes that Bowmore gives. Got a few questions. I will say, Justin, says he needs to look at the label for this one up close. He keeps thinking it's Grommet from Wallace and Grommet. That's an idea
It's
for a cheesy whiskey.
it is kind of, well, I can see why you would think that, although it is actually just a giant fairy bottle, like washing up liquid bottle turned into a Leviathan sea monster. Or it's a giant bar of soap with washing up liquid bottles for teeth and arms, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I should probably look at the label again.
Yeah. Ollie reckons this is coastal with some licorice and tropical fruits. Yeah, it's dishwashing liquids for arms and stuff like
Yes,
that.
that's right. Yeah.
It's
And then,
amazing.
so the sponge is keeping it at bay, and then there's a bunch of little, like that's you guys in the boat, safe and secure under the wing of the sponge, having a nice little whiskey tasting all at sea.
Yeah, love it. Rembrandt, Keenan was saying Rembrandt copyrights have expired, so maybe that'll be an easy
way. If
way.
you read the rear label, it does say, thanks to Rembrandt for very thoughtfully dying in 1770, whatever it was, and being out of copyright now. So yeah, we do acknowledge that we ripped him off, and there's nothing he can do about it. So
I hear Mickey Mouse is going into the public domain in the next 2 years, so that's food for thought.
I'm sure that Disney will find a way to prevent that from happening.
Absolutely.
Well, what just went into Winnie the Pooh just went into public domain, didn't it?
Yep.
And then someone made a horror film about it. That's what happens. Loving or beloved childhood iconic properties enter the public domain, and then sort of people with too much time on their hands make horror films out of them. It's not very imaginative. I don't know. I try to avoid, that's the thing. In the same way that when some people use like famous iconography of previous bottlers or old famous distillery bottlings, and you do that on their labels, or if their labels look really gorgeous but are just lifted from out of copyright old encyclopedias, it's cheating. It's all cheating. This is why I try to be, if we take an existing property like a famous artwork, then like we did Mona Lisa sponge, I think things like that are okay, but there's got to be enough of us in it that we've added or tweaked that's subtle or funny or to justify doing it. Generally speaking, I try to make most of our labels reasonably original, because I think with one of our USPs as a brand is original artworks and the amount of effort we put into doing the labels. And so I try to not have too much stuff in there which is just leaning too heavily on what other people have done before. I mean, obviously we're talking about a bottling where there's sort of a very literal rip-off of a famous artwork, and I've got others in the pipeline which are just as bad. But there's like we've got a bottling coming up which is another secret sponge, and it was a William Blake artwork that was used for inspiration, but my artist Rob made a video of how he creates the labels, and it is literally drawn from scratch by hand using a laptop. But so he does it digitally, but he does it sort of by hand, and it takes him ages, and he does it every kind of brush stroke and everything by hand. So we're never just carbon copying artworks. It's done very carefully and sensitively. In fact, I'll show you the label now if you want and have a sneak peek at what it is.
Yeah.
I'm afraid it's very expensive whiskey, because you'll understand why when I share it with you.
I think the phrase for what you guys do with the labels is called pastiche.
Oh yeah, pastiche definitely. But then plenty of them are just total original inventions.
Mostoy. Yep, gotcha.
Yeah, so this is the last cask Signatory had of Mostoy, 1979. Oh, wow. So 42-year-old. It's really gorgeous. It's like just yellow fruit juice. But yeah, and I've sort of we ummed and ahed about this for ages, but then just decided, fuck it, just do it.
What's the label reference?
So William Blake. It's famous. Well, I don't know how famous he is these days, but I mean, he's in terms of British and English literature, a famous poet and an artist who would write sort of amazing, quite phantasmagorical poems, and he was a sort of probably an early practitioner of things like surrealism, but also quite sort of dark and observationalist and often satirical poetry. And he really was a product of his time of like the 1700s Britain, and he would illustrate his poetry in his books. And so this is a riff off a famous William Blake. If you just Google William Blake artworks, this will come up on a Google Images search. The original, you'll see what we've tweaked and changed, but it's he had beautiful artworks. So I'm really happy with this label. But yeah, that'll be, I don't know what we'll do with that, probably released soonish.
Well, yeah, depending what people want, but we'll definitely get at least one bottle open in a bar in Sydney or Melbourne. Hopefully one in each state. Just very cool whiskey to have to try.
Yeah, I don't know, let me see what else I can show you as a, well, anyway, do people like the Bowmore? Which latest release are you the most excited about of the Glenmorangie, Glenspey, NAS5, Candle Kitty, Springbank? The Springbank is obviously very exciting. I don't want to show you the Springbank label just yet, because the whole thing about how that's presented on the bottle is going to be quite cool. So I'd rather wait and see how that pans out. So I've tried the Glenspey and the Glenmorangie, and they're fantastic. The Glenspey is really legitimately delicious. Like, it's pure honey and fruit juice. NAS5 I am very excited about because it's a I haven't tried it yet. In fact, I've got the proto vatting here on my desk, but it's a blended malt butt from 2001 sherry butt mixed with a first fill sherry butt of 2006 Ardmore. So the result is a 17-year-old blended malt, which will bottle at 53%. In fact, I believe it's getting bottled tomorrow. So the final result, I think, on the sampling I've done and the little pre-mixes suggest it will be delicious, but it's had, I think, nearly 8 months longer in the wood since I did these mixes, and it's just so it would get past the 17-year-old hurdle. So I'm really hopeful this is going to be exactly what I want, which is a fairly priced, very delicious, well-matured, fully sherried, quaffing whiskey. And the blended malt component brings a real old school, classy, sort of elegant sherry vibe to it. And the Ardmore brings richness and robustness and spice and power. So the two of them together should deliver something really delicious, especially at 53%, which is that sweet spot between the power of cask strength with a little bit more approachability. And also half of it is 21 years old, at least nearly 22 years old. So actually really it's, it's got those layers of maturity beyond 17 years. So I think 95 quid on the shelf, 17-year-old, in my head, that's what I've really been trying to work towards for a long time now, which is just to deliver something really good quality, really delicious at a fair price. So I hope it's a success. We've got tons of it. So you should all be ordering loads and loads and drinking like there's no tomorrow. Just throw the cork in the fire. Bowmore does not drink at the quoted strength, lightly peated. Yeah, I agree that's one of the reasons we did it cask strength in this one, because it was just so easy. And I think that's always a sign of a good whiskey, is when it shows with great freshness and approachability at its natural strength. Candle Kitty is going to be great. It's 2010. It's the same parcel casks we used for our Equinox and Solstice summer Candle Kitty in 2022, and it was 2021 when it was 10 years old. Yeah, so it's now just got even more concentration, and this is going to be done at 57.1, the Candle Kitty. So 12-year-old 100 proof Clynelish, super. It's a wax bomb. It's going to be fucking good. And I'm working on a very cool label for that one. I don't know if I've got anything else to like secret or super exciting to show you.
Is everyone familiar with all the Decadent Drinks brands? Well, obviously drinking WhiskySponge. You've just mentioned NAS and Equinox. Are we all familiar that there's a family now? We're getting nods.
Yeah, so notable age statements is going to be the 17-year-old blended malt. So our notable age statement series is really our home for all our different. So it's a home for different spirits with the focus is always on age. So that's why we've got a 58-year-old Armagnac, done a 7-year-old Ben Nevis, 10-year-old Mortlach, 30-year-old blended malt. So, and we've just got a 15-year-old Foursquare rum at the moment, multi-vintage small batch rum. And that is being followed by the 17-year-old blended malt I just mentioned there. What else? All the sort of more exciting artworks are kind of in development. Although I will show you what I think looks beautiful is the Rum Sponge Special Edition that we've just had bottled. I'm so happy with how this looks. So it's good I can do this stuff now that I've figured out how to fix the bloody screen share that was blighting me for months. Where is screen share?
Well,
Okay,
while
so this is,
he's getting that up as well,
so this is Rum Sponge Special Edition, which is just about to be released next month. And this is something mental we've done where we took some of the Clarendon 97 we recently just bottled, took a bit of that cask and some 1997 Coroni and mixed them together 50-50. And both of these had over 20 years tropical maturation. So, and this is hand-blown cognac glass we've used, and we're going to use the same glass for the Springbank bottling that's coming up. So it's, yeah, that's really beautiful, I think. I'm really happy with how this has turned out. And it's gorgeous rum. It's pure sort of tropical maturation profile, and it's kind of mental. I'm not sure, I don't know any other bottlers that would do potentially insane things like this, but there's only 90 bottles, so fine.
Yep. Well, I can't say for certain, but I'm sure Ollie will get his hands on a couple.
I think you guys have got a few on the way.
Yeah, we ordered it.
Yeah.
So it's the sort of thing that is perfect for bars because you know, like in that, yeah. So what you guys have is this amazing bar culture. You don't need a lot of bottles. It's a few bottles that go to a few key bars, and that, for me, that's perfect because it enables people to go, and you know, it's an expensive product, but if you want to taste something really insane and beautiful like that, and it's rare, it's it's something nice to go and treat yourself to a dram of, and then one dram will be enough for you to remember this rum, I promise you. So yeah, speaking of intense mental liquids, Ledaig. So this is, I think, a great bottling. I'm very happy with this whiskey, and this is 2005 Ledaig, which was matured full term in second fill sherry butts. So when I tried these, I tried two of these butts individually when I was at Signatory, and I thought they're just fantastic. They were annoyingly pricey because it was a recent purchase by Signatory, but it was one of those situations where I thought I just have to make this work, have to do it because it's such a gorgeous profile. So what happened with these is that I think these casks matured in a pretty dry environment for Scotland. This is the closest Scotland gets to warmish climate maturation, in that you notice the number of bottles in this release is, for two sherry butts at 17 years old, is really low. It's 314 bottles, something like that.
312.
312. Yeah, 312 bottles. And that's really low. There'd been quite a lot of evaporation from these casks, and the strength was high. One of them was about 67%, the other one was about 61 or 60%, and then so that had created this super concentrated profile. And in second fill sherry, so reasonably active second fill sherry, which means that the level of sherry is intense but still controlled, and it is such a concentrated, intense fusion with that Ledaig kind of grubby, massive, fat peatiness. And the result is something that is, I think, much closer to one of those big sherry and peat bombs of old. I think it's quite an old style profile, this, and it reminds me more of early 70s Ledaigs than a lot of the other contemporary examples out there. So that's why we wanted to do it. So, and on this occasion as well, because the casks were quite accessible, Signatory agreed to dump one in on top of the other for a few months. So these have married, and that I think really helps bring cohesion to the full profile. So it's a small batch double cask bottling essentially. So yeah, 312 bottles, natural cask strength, 62.1, and just this wonderfully intense, rich, just massive profile. And again, even at high strength, it still works on the palate. It's this huge warming flood of richly sherried peat smoke. And it's this particularly gamey, leathery, tarry, medicinal profile of peat and sherry, where you're starting to get things like, you know, that game meat thing, but also sarsaparilla, root beer syrup, and, you know, salted licorice, and all these really intense, big, charismatic flavors that just burst out. I really love this whiskey. It's why we did it as edition 70. Every 10th edition of Sponge, I tried to do something really special. And that's why for edition 80, we went something completely different, which is just a really low level single cask Glen Spey. I mean, who cares about Glen Spey? But this was really stood out. So that's why we opted for that as edition 80. And ironically enough, actually, that had a similar maturation profile in that there's only 114 bottles came out of the cask, and that was after we reduced it to 60%. Before that, the cask strength of the Glen Spey was 65% ABV at 32 years old. And so it just took it down to 60 to round it out, and still only 114 bottles. So it's a similar sort of maturation profile to the Ledaig in some respects, and a similar concentration effect, which just delivered this gorgeous profile. So the Glen Spey will be another superb candidate for, you know, I think quite popular on the shelf on bars over there, hopefully. But back to the Ledaig, just exactly the sort of profile that I dreamed to find, which is really beautiful sherry and peat.
Yeah, it's very similar to like a unicorn Ledaig that I've been hunting for, but like the Chinese 5-spice notes that I get on this.
Oh yeah,
like,
I agree.
Like
Yeah,
incredible, and it's very special. This is my birthday bottle for my 30th birthday. So it's
happy birthday.
Oh, it's long past. I'm old. It's all downhill from here.
Well,
But
it's a great choice. Yeah, no, I'm glad you like it. I also love it, and that's where we went to town with the label and tried to make something that was perhaps just a slightly more elegant than we would normally do. I wanted to make this quite a special proposition, this bottling. So yeah, I'm really pleased with it.
Yeah, it looks like everyone else is loving it as well. Like Scott's enjoying the chewiness. Sally, the little cheek's gorgeous. Yeah, 100%.
I really like the fact that there's quite a broad spread on the vote here, on the on everyone's favorite.
As a host, you can see the results, not everyone yet. So
sorry.
It's always keen to see what the final vote is.
It is my favorite part of the night as well, to watch it. It's like watching an election, but it's actually exciting. You know, just seeing all the numbers change and stuff like that. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know what my favorite of all these would be. Probably the Ledaig, if I had matches put under my fingernails and forced to make a choice. But it's a really good spread of drams, actually. That's a nice tasting you've put together tonight.
There's the results.
Gosh, Ledaig and Bowmore neck and neck. That's cool. Yeah, Bowmore's a class act as well. It's such a nice cask. I really love it. Yeah.
It's such a unique, interesting, like, spirit style as well, and to be able to get editions and releases that have all that character is my favorite.
It's also nice to do the Bowmore and the Ledaig followed by the Ledaig, because they're both such completely different expressions of peat flavor, and really demonstrates just what complexity and diversity peat brings to Scotch whisky when it's done well. I mean, obviously, and also the fact that they've both got, to different degrees, but they've both got a sherry influence. I mean, they're essentially, I think, both matured in the same cask type, but obviously the sherry in the Bowmore is way lower than the Ledaig, but still. Angus, will there be any WhiskySponge Glendronach bottle? Well, now there's a question. There would be if I found a good cask of Glendronach. I spoke to someone recently about trying to buy some bourbon barrels of Glendronach, but it's just tricky. It's one of those. It's a hard one to find. I would love to find some Glendronach. I love Glendronach, but at the moment there is none on the horizon that I can see. But you know,
are you a Billy Walker fan, Rachel Barry, or pre both of them?
I mean, I suppose I don't look at it as people, because, you know, Billy Walker bought the distillery and then proceeded to bottle all the incredible stuff and then sold it once he rinsed through all the really good juice. You know, his business model is clear and pretty, you know, makes sense. It's like, buy a distillery that's underappreciated with piles of aged stock, bottle and release said aged stock, target it at nerds who will massively grow and develop the, you know, the critical consensus and street cred of your distillery, ergo adding loads of value to it, sell it for tens and tens of millions more pounds than you paid for it, move on. He's essentially like the Borg of distillery and brand developers. It's like buy, assimilate, do thing to it, sell, move on. He's doing the same thing to Glenallachie, you know?
Someone referred to it as the smoke bomb. He's like, he comes in, yeah, sell, and then poof, gone somewhere else.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's more to it than that, but that is essentially what he does, and it's perfectly smart and clever. But and I think perhaps what he's doing with Glenallachie as well, which is he's done quite a lot of changes to production and trying to create a more distinctive house profile and laying that down for the future. That's, you know, that's very smart as well. I don't know how much of that went on at Glendronach or Benriach, but you know, he did a good job on those distilleries because he rightly identified that they had incredible stocks. The distilleries, the names were still underrated outside, you know, total nerd groups, and you know, he saw these warehouses full of amazing diamond casks and sensibly released them as single casks. So yeah, and Rachel Barry does a good job as well. I really like Glenglassaugh. I think Glenglassaugh is an underrated make, and it can be really beautiful whiskey. And I would love to see more of the new stuff they're making, because I think some of that's really good juice. So I don't have a preference in terms of person. I think what they've done and continue to do with the distilleries is interesting up to a point. But yeah, they're just nice whiskies, and you know, generally well treated. Is it what I would do if I own those distilleries? Probably not. I'd probably do something much more commercially tricky to navigate. But yeah.
That's something you're getting to do soon.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, there's loads. I would like to do a sponge bottling of every distillery if I could, and there's still a few in the pipeline that we haven't done yet that are going to come up. But yeah, it's all about supply and availability, and you know, like my dream really would be to do things like an Oban and a Talisker and really complete like the West Coast, West Highland names, but that's that's impossible as far as I'm aware. So yeah. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. If anyone would like to ask any final questions before I've got to shoot off, then please do. But yeah, otherwise, I mean, thank you very much. I always like doing these wee tastings, and I'm very pleased that you continue to put them together and host them. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for always taking a morning out to drink, or at least talk whiskey with us while we're drinking. But yeah, if anyone's got any last minute questions for Angus, pop them in the chat. Unfortunately, has a busy work day to get to. But if there isn't anything, thank you everyone so much for joining along and for tasting some absolutely incredible whiskies as usual. I mean, the like different, weird, intricate, all that kind of stuff. There's always something new and exciting in every one of these tastings. So
Well, thank you very much. It's a good spread we had tonight. So I'm glad everyone seems to enjoy it. And oh yeah, congrats Emma on your recent awards. Yeah, sorry, I should have said.
I thought I'd get through a whole tasting without any mention of it.
So for those who aren't aware, Angus announced he's starting his own distillery a couple of weeks ago. At the same time, Emma won World's Best Communicator in the Icons of Whiskey. So we got two very exciting news-worthy champions here. So I'm just gonna wave from the distance here. But no,
Yeah,
it's
lots
very
happening.
exciting. Very cool.
Yeah, that is a great achievement. Well done, Emma.
Well, I mean,
So
arguably yours is more exciting. I have nothing to talk about without
we'll
people.
see. We'll see. Give it about 6-7 years, and then we'll talk. All right, I'm gonna shoot off. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great rest of your evening. And please buy loads of bottles from Whiskey List.
Hold on, everyone else, stay on for 30 seconds. Thanks, Angus.
Take care,
All right,
Angus.
thanks. Cheers, everyone. Bye bye.
Let me just stop the recording.